Cutting down to size flat pack furniture. It's a really quick way of making good looking bespoke size furniture perfect for your situation. And it's not that difficult, but there's a right way of doing it. And this isn't it. $6.50, you must be joking. Although flat pack furniture comes in a range of widths and heights, quite often you'll want to fill a gap like this in a size that they just don't produce. I've got a gap of $6.50 and I want to fill this whole wall with bookcases, but I know that these bookcases are only made in widths of 400 or 800, so I'm going to have to buy a bigger one and cut it down to suit. Similarly, you'll find sometimes when you're trying to put in wardrobes into bedrooms, if they've got a low ceiling height, they're maybe just a couple of inches too tall, so you want to cut them down to fit the ceiling. So today I'm going to show you how to reduce the height of flat pack furniture or the width of flat pack furniture without anyone being able to tell you've done it, and keeping the integrity and the strength forevermore. So let's go down to the workshop and I will show you how I do it. For ease of use, I'm using a smaller IKEA bookcase to demonstrate on today, but the principle is the same on any size flat pack furniture. The two main fixings we have to deal with are the straightforward wooden dowel and a cam and pin, or sometimes called cam lock and cam dowel fixings, where the pin is screwed into one side of the cabinet and it's grabbed and tightened by a cam in the other. The biggest challenge to modifying furniture like this is replicating the holes that both of these fixings use, but accurately. I've just put together this bookcase so you can see what I'm demonstrating on. Obviously I haven't put the back in or the shelves because I'm taking it apart again in a minute anyway. And the first thing I'm going to show you is how to reduce the height. The first thing we need to do is decide how much we need to take off of the wardrobe or the bookcase, and I can't dictate what that is for your circumstance. I'm going to assume that in this case I'm going to take off 125 or 5 inches. And now we have two choices. Do we take that off the bottom or do we take it off the top? Now for a small bookcase like this, if I took it off the top and cut these side panels, when I put it on the ground, I'll be able to see an open chipboard edge on that. Now in theory you could get some edge banding and try to stick it on and match it. In practice, the chances of you doing that successfully are not much higher than 0, because the colour's not going to be the same, the texture's not going to be the same. So I would suggest in a circumstance like this, it's better to take those 5 inches off the bottom that may be sitting on carpet or on the floor, that you just won't see an open chipboard face. If you're doing this with a wardrobe, you do need to take into account that wherever you take off that trim, the top or the bottom, you're going to have to do the same on the doors. Now, so if you've got a wardrobe that goes right up to the ceiling, you may find that is better off trimmed off the top, because you can never actually see on top of the door rather than the bottom that probably finishes a couple of inches off of the floor. And because I'm taking off 5 inches, it means that these two pieces of chipboard will lose all their fixings into this side piece. So when I take this off, all the fixings involved in these two need to be replicated exactly 5 inches higher. So what I need to do now is take this apart, and the first thing I need to do is chop off that bottom 5 inches. Cutting melamine like this can be done on a table saw or a circular or plunge saw to get the best results. Although it's possible to do it by hand or use a jigsaw, what you'll end up with is quite a ragged edge. Here I'm going to use my plunge saw, but first I tape the cut line to help get a cleaner cut. It's also important that the face that's more on view is at the bottom here, which will naturally end up with a cleaner cut because of the direction the blade attacks the melamine face. I use my combination square set to 125mm to position the guide rail accurately so both sides of the cabinet are cut millimetre perfect. To get the best results, set the depth of the cut just a couple of millimetres deeper than the piece. The top face comes out okay, but not perfect. And the bottom face, which is actually the outside face of the cabinet, comes out a lot better, about as good as you can expect. I then do exactly the same on the other panel that makes up the other side of the bookcase. This is one of the pieces I've just cut, and this is my 5 inches off the bottom. So what we need to do now is to replicate these holes that connect the cross pieces into the new side exactly 5 inches further up than they were to start with. And the great thing about using this technique is that we can actually use this that we've cut off as a jig if we line it up with the bottom to dictate exactly where these holes should be, without any measuring at all, because if they're off a little bit, everything's going to look a little bit wibbly wobbly and all over the place. So if we just bolt that to there, if we just clamp that down, we can drill through these and get everything in exactly the right place. Before we do that, we do need to think a little bit about depth, because these holes don't go all the way through. They're not coming out the other side. So we need to stop at some point before we come out the back face. At the same time, we need them deep enough to accept the fixings and the dowels that we've got in here. So before I clamp that and start drilling, I'll show you how to do that. All of these holes are metric, with the dowels being 8mm and the pins 5mm. So a standard metric set of brad point bits are perfect to recreate these new holes. I drill all the way through one of the offcuts, which means I can put my drill bit through that and into the hole below to mark the required depth with tape. Which I do for both size drill bits, and then I line up the offcut with the bottom and the sides of the newly cut side panel, making sure it's as close as it can be just by touch. Then I can use the offcut as a template to position, drill and replicate the holes and their spacing, making sure I don't over drill. I do the same on the other side with its respective offcut. As well as positioning the holes perfectly to each other, the thickness of the melamine also helps me to drill them perpendicular to the face to help accuracy. While I'm at it, I also use the offcut to mark out and cut out the back for the skirting. With the drilling and cutting done, I can reinstate the pins in the same relative position as before and assemble the newly sized bookcase. I use the combination square again without adjusting it at all to trim the same amount off of the backing hardboard, which then fits perfectly as exactly the same amount has been cut off each piece. And there you go. So that is the height cut down by exactly that amount. And because I used exactly the same fixings as the original, then it's just as strong and just as sturdy as the original would be. And actually, if you have a look at this corner, which is the new corner, it looks exactly the same and just as tight as the original. And obviously the trick to doing this is to use a piece that you've cut off as a jig, so the new holes that you drill are exactly spaced correctly, so everything fits nice and tightly. If they're too close together, it's not going to fit. If they're too wide apart, you're going to end up with gaps everywhere. So now I'm going to move on to making this narrower than it currently is. Let's say 150 millimeters or 6 inches, which is going to take a little bit more work because I've also got the shelves to cut down and I've got these cams to sort out. And for that, I'm going to be using a 15 millimeter Forstner bit, which just happens to be exactly the same size as the cams. After many minutes of messing around trying to get a screwdriver to lift a cam out, here's a little trick for getting them out of the holes. Just use duct tape. For each of these new ends, the system is exactly the same. I just use the piece that's cut off as a template or jig to drill the new holes. The holes that accept the shelf pins have two different sizes to them, an inner and an outer, so I use the two offcuts from each of the shelves, which are exactly the same, one for each size, drilling the larger one first and then the smaller, deeper one. So that's the bookcase finish, and now it's 6 inches narrower than it was 20 minutes ago. And because I use exactly the same technique as the original, the joints are still tight and the shelves fit nice and tight just like they did before, because essentially we're using the same fittings in the same way as it came out the box with. The only difference is it's now a little bit lower and a little bit narrower. I hope this video has given you some ideas on how to make your flat pack furniture more bespoke for your situation. Remember, Patreon, subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and I will see you next time.